as they go, I do want to just say that I'm greatly ashamed of the ugliness that I'm wearing today. I apologize to you, and I'm confident that it will end soon. Next year is the plan. That's been the plan. That's bad too. Lipstick on a pig, is that what you said? Thanks, Dylan. And no, that's not any better, Dave. I mean, it's just like, they're both terrible. Pat was standing next to me in the foyer, and I thought, oh, this is a really bad look. Except my high school colors were green and gold, so my daughter said if I just threw a line here and turned this, whoa, I almost fell down the stairs, into a Q, then I'd be fine. I could just walk around like this all day and be happy. But for those of you that don't know, Dylan's a big Ducks fan. I'm a big Huskies fan. We have a running bet. The loser has to wear the other guy's shirt, and eventually he will wear purple. So, you will. So, with all that said, I wanted you to know that even though it seems like maybe I'm not that smart, seeing as how I keep having to wear this dumb shirt, I was something of a child prodigy. See, there's no laughter because you guys aren't surprised. You knew. Yeah, we kind of saw that in you. We had a feeling that you were sort of a prodigy. I was reading a complete book before I was 2 years old, about 18 months. I could completely read a book. I was incredibly impressive. The book I could read is up there. It was called The Lion and the Deer. Has anybody seen The Lion and the Deer? Anybody ever read that when they were kids? You were all robbed of the greatest children's story ever written. Non-Bible section. Okay. It was great. It was a great story, and I loved it. It's an incredible story about a deer who outsmarts a lion who was hiding in his cave. The deer lived in a cave, and the lion's hiding inside that cave, waiting every night to eat, or one night to eat the deer, and the lion is outsmarted by the deer. It's a great, great story. And so one night, my parents had some friends over. I'm 18, 19 months old, and the friends come over, and I'm sitting on the couch, and I'm reading this book perfectly because I was a child prodigy. I mean, that's what I was. And so these friends were incredibly impressed. They were like, your kid is amazing. And my mom was like, you know he is. And she still says that about me. Now, here's what really happened. I loved that book. I loved that book so much that I made my parents read it to me constantly. They had to read it to me in the morning. They had to read it to me in the afternoon. They had to read it to me at night. And I had become so familiar with that book that I knew exactly when to turn the pages. I could quote it word for word. I could do all the silly voices that my dad and my mom could do. And so it appeared that I was reading the book. And that night, apparently, the friends brought me and said, give him another one. And I'm like, the deer lived in a house. Wait a minute, this is a story about Mickey Mouse. I'm like, well, it's a story about a deer. So this prodigyness that I had was not so impressive because it was just basically me memorizing things, which is something that, all of us do every day. So it wasn't that impressive. This morning, though, we're going to look at a story as we continue our series on the essential stories of Jesus, where Jesus does something that, to me, is overwhelmingly impressive. It absolutely blows my mind how impressive what Jesus did, and it's the kind of thing we all should be able to really be in awe of when you think about it. So if you have your Bible, turn to John chapter 8. We're going to look at verses 2 through 11. And before we do, I did this in the other order in the first service. I like doing it this way now, so hopefully I don't throw you off, Holly. But this story, if you have your own Bible, you may see that it says above it that the earliest manuscripts don't include this story. That doesn't mean that this story isn't true or that this didn't happen. It just means that the earliest manuscripts don't have this story in it. And the reason is, whatever the reason is, but scholars tend to agree that it happened, and you'll notice that it's in most versions of the Bible. They still put it there, but it wasn't in the earliest manuscripts. It was recognized early throughout the first century as a story that took place. It just wasn't in John's original manuscripts, and so I wanted to make that clear before we read it so you're not feeling like, hey, wait a minute, this guy's trying to dupe us. So it was recognized as a story that took place, but not in the earliest manuscripts. So, with that said, let's continue. John chapter 8, verses 2 through 11. It says this, "At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?' They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, 'Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her.' Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, 'Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?' 'No one, sir,' she said. 'Then neither do I condemn you,' Jesus declared. 'Go now and leave your life of sin.'" I've always been fascinated by this story. Like the video we watched, it is a wonderful example of Jesus' compassion and grace. And at the same time, it's a great example of Jesus' desire to see us walk in obedience. If you've been around the church at all, if you have any kind of history with the Bible, if you've been in discussions that are religious in nature, you've probably come in contact with this story or someone quoting this story to you at some point in time. It's a very commonly used story to demonstrate God's grace, but also his desire to see us walk in obedience. As he says to her, "Yes, I'm not going to throw a stone at you, but go and leave your life of sin." And that's very much how we focus on this story most of the time. And it's impressive. It's impressive the way that Jesus deals with this woman caught in this terrible situation. But it's child's play when you consider how he handled the crowd that day. As we like to do, I want you to imagine with me for a minute what this situation would have been like. We tend to think of, when we read the Bible, and I tell you this all the time, but we just kind of read it, and we're like, oh, this kind of happened. But try to put yourself in the situation. It's early in the morning. They're in the temple courts. People are gathered, and Jesus is teaching. So if you really want to play it out, it's a situation very similar to what we have going on right this second. Someone's teaching Jesus. He's a lot better, and he's Jesus, but hey. And people are listening. That's the story of what's going on. And in comes a group of religious leaders, and they bring with them a woman caught in the act of adultery. Okay? They didn't catch her on Thursday and hold her in a cell. They grabbed her and brought her. Okay? So imagine this story. Everybody's here. They're listening. They're watching. They're seeing what's going on. And in comes this crowd of people, the religious leaders, with a disheveled, probably half-clothed and half-covered woman. They throw her at Jesus' feet and say, "Hey, the law says we have to stone her. What do you say?" Who thinks that was probably a calm situation? Could you imagine if somebody walked in right now from a church down the street, threw somebody on the ground and said, "Hey, pastor, should we throw these rocks in our hands at her or not?" Can you imagine the woman? Here she is on the ground. She's in this state. She's been taken from where she was to where she is. Guys with rocks standing around her saying, "The law says we're supposed to stone her." Do you think that might have caught her attention? Whoa, hey, what? I don't see a calm, reasonable discourse about to take place. I see an angry mob there to see justice done and their enemy discredited. Now, what's fascinating to me is that the law does say, absolutely, that the woman was to be stoned. But that's not all it says. Do you know what the law actually says? The law says that she is supposed to be stoned to death along with the man she was with. Well, where's that guy? He's not anywhere to be found, is he? I'm envisioning a picture that is crazy. It's chaotic. it's confusing. You probably have these people that are there listening going, whoa, we came to hear the teacher teach, and now everything has gone nuts. And yet, when the story ends, the religious leaders walk away quietly and peacefully, without so much as one stone being thrown. To me, that's impressive. To me, that's amazing that Jesus is able to do that. For many people, this is a story about grace and forgiveness. And those are certainly secondary elements of the story. But for me, this is really a story about conflict. The adulterous woman gets the headline, but this is a story about how Jesus and the religious leaders dealt with conflict. Well, why do I say that? Because the woman wasn't their target. She was a pawn in their game. Jesus was their target. They hated him. He was challenging their system. He was healing on the Sabbath. He was telling people that they didn't have to follow the ways, the strict adherence to the law that the Pharisees wanted them to adhere to. He was telling people to love their enemies. He was basically completely and totally upsetting the system they'd been in, this safe system under the Romans. And even as a Messiah, he wasn't saying, hey, let's overthrow the Romans and return Israel to its former glory. He was saying, my kingdom's not about this kind of thing anyway. It's a different kingdom. These guys hated Jesus. They despised Jesus. And so they come into this situation trying to maintain order, trying to remain in their current position. That's what this story is about. It's about how these religious leaders attack Jesus. So as followers of Christ, as we read this story, absolutely, we need to look at the way he dealt with the woman. But I think we need to learn about what Jesus did to deal with the crowd that day. So what can we as followers of Christ learn from the way that Jesus dealt with the crowd? Well, to answer that question, I think we need to understand exactly what their intention was that day and to put it into words that we can all kind of agree on. The way I see it, when you break it down, essentially, they showed up that day to attack Jesus' religion. Now, that's not a word that we use here very often, is it? If you've been with us for any amount of time, we don't use the word religion very often at all. It's kind of become a four-letter word in the church because it's been so misused, it's been so abused, it's just not been able to have the same potency that God's intended for it to have. But if you really break it down, the word religion simply means this. Religion is how we act based on what we believe about God. It's how we act based on what we believe about God, the way we live out this belief we have about God. And because that's true, everyone has a religion, don't they? If you're an atheist, you absolutely have a religion. You believe God doesn't exist, and so you act as though God does not exist. If you are a person who is a universalist, right, and everybody's going to heaven no matter what you do, then you act based on that belief that everybody's going to heaven no matter what you do. At this point in time, the Jews believed that strict adherence to the law was the only way to live out your faith. They believed in rules and order. And so Jesus was calling their religion into question. This made them so upset that they were willing to do whatever it took to continue protecting their system, including having Jesus killed. At Exodus, our desire is to be like Jesus. My prayer, our prayer, is that we would be a church filled with people whose heart's desire is to live out a religion that looks exactly like Jesus. That the way we would act based on what we believe about God is the way that Jesus acts. That's who we want to be. We want to be transformed into the likeness of Jesus Christ. It's why we teach and preach and sing and do Sunday school and small groups. We want to live the way we've been called to live. That's our religion. Now, let's be honest, that's not a popular way to live nowadays, is it? In fact, if you live that way nowadays, you're going to invite confrontation, aren't you? If you live in such a way that you take seriously the path that Jesus walked, if you take seriously living the life Jesus called you to live, it's going to invite attack from other people. It's going to make people so uncomfortable, so angry, so frustrated with the way you live that they are going to come after you in exactly the same way that the religious leaders came after Jesus. People are going to try to trap you, to discredit you. This is something you should expect to have happen. And so I'll just throw it out there. How many of you guys have had that happen at some point in your life? We participate here. You can get in my pie, okay? Somebody's attacked you for what you believe. They've come after you. They've challenged you. They've tried to discredit what you believe. I think most Christians have. I think most of us have ended up in some kind of a discussion, some type of an issue based on what we believe, where someone's really tried to challenge us. But unfortunately, I also think that most Christians have handled those interactions very, very poorly. Not all, but I think most of us have handled them very poorly. So this morning, I want to look closer at how Jesus handled an attack on his religion. What did he do when these men came and attacked the way he lived out his belief so that we can then emulate it and be more like Jesus? Amen? So I see three things Jesus did to handle this challenge to his religion. The first thing Jesus did was he refused to match their intensity. Jesus refused to match their intensity. Have any of you ever been pushed? Like literally pushed? We participate here. Good. All right. If you haven't, I'm going a different direction. So I need to know if I'm on the fly or if I can stick to the notes. Okay. So when you get pushed, how do you typically respond to being pushed? You push back, right? The posture that you take is not typically double push, right? It's typically you get big, you throw your chest up, you get your arms up, you make yourself larger and more intimidating, and typically these arms move to this position, don't they? When you get pushed, our natural response is to defend ourselves physically. Most of us, when we're pushed, plan to push back or worse. I think most people, when our religion, when our way of living in response to God is challenged, do the exact same thing. We get defensive. We get angry. We look to match the intensity of our challenger. We get loud. And we look for our best lines of verbal defense or offense. But look at what Jesus did. The scripture said that when this attack came, when this challenge came, Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Now, for centuries, people have been speculating about what it is that Jesus wrote on the ground. What was he writing? And some people have thought he was writing the names of all the people that were there. Or he was writing the word love. Or, something like that. Jesus was just, writing all this stuff. Let's be honest. We have no idea what he was writing. The scripture doesn't say it. And unfortunately, we have 2,000 years of erosion and wind, and he wrote in the dirt, okay? So no archaeologist is going to track it down and say, I found it. He was writing a note to all of us, okay? We aren't going to know. But it hasn't stopped people from speculating. And the most popular speculation is this idea that what Jesus was doing was writing down a list of their sins or the list of the commandments, and then the guys would see it and be like, oh, that's me. But here's the problem. I think we get so caught up in what was Jesus writing that we miss a greater point. Rather than matching their intensity, Jesus knelt down. He didn't step up. He didn't get in their face. He didn't get angry with them. He took a posture physically, verbally, volume-wise that was smaller. He got less threatening physically, emotionally. Verbally, he made himself smaller. Instead of trying to ramp up, he took a physical position that de-escalated the situation, that made things calmer, instead of taking this calm situation that got crazy and making it even crazier. He tried to bring it back down. How many of you have ever been in a shouting match? I've been in them with umpires. It's great. Not Dave, but umpires, because umpires are dumb. Except for Dave. How many of you have lost your temper when your religion's been challenged? How many of you guys have had somebody talk to you and say, this whole Jesus thing is stupid or blah, blah, blah? How many of you have ever, even if they don't even attack you directly, but they just talk about the stupidity of being someone who believes in Jesus and it's made you mad? Has anybody ever been there and you've just been like, how many of you have ever acted on that and you've gotten into a brawl with somebody verbally where you're like, oh yeah, and maybe it's not screaming, but maybe it's all caps, right? You're on Facebook and you're just going at it and you're caps lock. No. Has it ever worked? I don't have all the data in front of me, but I'm feeling pretty confident with the idea that the answer is no. Now listen, you may feel good when it's over, and you may be like, yeah, Jesus, you and me got him. But really all that happened at the end is you feel good about the zingers and one-liners you got in and the fact that the person that just challenged you knows they're going to hell because you told them. Jesus understood that matching their intensity, that getting angry, that getting louder was not going to fix the situation. It was going to escalate the situation, not de-escalate. And so he remained calm. Now, I saw an awesome example of this about 20 years ago. When Nikki and I were very first married, she was 18 when she took the job. She took a job as the C Squad volleyball coach in Fruitland, Idaho, at the school where I coached softball. Now, she had lived in town literally 2 weeks when you started the job, because they started in the fall, summer in August. So she's, not even 19 years old yet. It was kind of a crazy scenario. So she's the C Squad volleyball coach. And Fruitland is a small town, and it's got small town politics and small townness to it. It's a small town, right? And so you had some people in town with some money and names that people knew. And you had some people in town without as much money and names that people didn't know as much. And Nikki's been in town for how long? Like 2 weeks. She doesn't know who has money and who doesn't have money. Do you know what Nikki knew? Who tried and who could play. That's what she knew. So guess who played? The kids who tried and who could play. So one night they were playing a game. They were at home in Fruitland, and they played a hard-fought match. And I don't remember if they won or lost. I think they lost, I'm pretty sure. And when the match ends, the C Squad volleyball match. Anybody ever been to a C Squad volleyball match? Seriously, it waterboarded me, okay? It's that bad. If you have blood relatives, go. If not, you're all right. There's plenty of other things you can do. Paint drying somewhere. It is rough. It is so hard to watch. But she had a row of furious parents. They were so mad. And they were just over the C Squad volleyball match. And they were angry. And they were loud. And they were letting people know. And the head volleyball coach, the varsity coach, was a woman named Pat Coffey. And Pat was a great coach and a very smart woman. And she stepped into the fray. And she's got all these parents, and they're angry, and they're mad, and my kid should be the starter in the C Squad. And Pat just started to talk to them very, very calmly, very, very quietly, and was asking what their frustrations were. And talking about how Nikki really didn't know who any of these kids were, so no, she's not playing the rich kids because she doesn't know who's rich and who's poor. She doesn't care. And all of a sudden, I watched these parents who were so mad realize, boy, we're really loud right now, aren't we? Because she was so quiet, they realized the discrepancy between how loud they were and how quiet they were. And you could just watch these parents, kind of the air, they're like, whoa. And Pat did a brilliant job of de-escalating that situation that could have gotten very, very heated and out of control. Nikki said to me, I don't know if she had looked it up or if she just knew it, but she shared with me a verse that I've always associated with that story. It's Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1, and it says this: "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Jesus was gentle. He didn't incite. He calmed the situation, which made it possible for something positive to come out of the situation, something great to come out of the situation. The second thing Jesus did is Jesus took his time and used his head. He took his time and used his head. When I was in Spokane and in Fruitland, I served as the conference youth director with my friend Chris Sloan. We were the co-conference youth directors. And so we were responsible for event planning and trainings and things like that, and also interacting with the different youth pastors in our conference. And so we would kind of talk with them about things going on in their lives and ministry. And I remember one time we had a friend, his name was Willie, and Willie was the youth pastor at our Free Methodist Church in Colville. And has anybody ever been to Colville, Washington? Yeah, it's great. Anyway, so Colville's kind of a conservative area, and their church was an incredibly conservative church, and there were many families like this in the church, but one in particular was a very conservative family with very strict ideas about what was said and done and seen and heard, and all. They were very, very narrow in their views of how people should conduct themselves, okay? And they had a student in the youth group, a young girl. And Willie was trying to connect with her, and he was always kind of nervous about it and struggled with this. And so one night, the family invited Willie and his wife over for dinner. So Willie and his wife go to dinner at this family's house. And it's one of these dinners that's just crazy awkward, right? Because he doesn't know what to say, and they don't really have a lot in common. And, you're trying to eat, and, oh, I'm not talking because my mouth is full. That's why I'm not. But you can hear yourself chewing, and then you feel weird, and it's just awkward. It was that kind of dinner. And so Willie's getting more and more nervous, and he's kind of like, oh, this is not going well. And he knew it was not going well. Well, the time came for dessert after the meal was over. And they were having pie or cake or something like that. And Willie recognized that he didn't have a fork, and he looked over, and the girl from the youth group also did not have a fork. And she said, "I don't know where my fork is." To which, without missing a beat, and unfortunately without thinking, Willie replied, "If it was up your butt, you'd know." We did not coach him that. We didn't tell him to do that. So it did not help the situation, needless to say. It led to the family saying, "We'd like you to leave now." They left, and that family went to see the senior pastor immediately. And basically, it was a huge deal. The way it turned out was Willie had to write a letter of apology that he read to the family, to the lead pastor, to the staff, and eventually in front of the whole church, asking for forgiveness and saying he was sorry for his comment that I won't say again. Willie, I love the guy. He's a great guy. He really is. But why did he get in trouble? Why did Willie get in trouble? For his comment, absolutely. But why did Willie end up in trouble? Because he didn't think before he spoke. He just blurted out the first thing that hit his medulla oblongata, right? It just flew out of his mouth. He spoke without thinking. How many of you have ever done that? How many of you ever spoke without thinking and you said something offensive or mean or rude? Yeah, we've been there. Okay? Hopefully you haven't had the consequences Willie had where you said it to the wrong people at the wrong time. But we've all been there. We've all said something that we didn't mean to say. Now, when you factor in the idea that your religion, which should be the most important thing in the world to you, what you believe about God and how you live that out, is now being challenged, it's easy to let your emotions get the best of you and say something stupid, isn't it? James chapter 1, verse 19 and 20 says this: "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. As we look at the story of Jesus and the religious leaders, once again, we get lost in the speculation of what was Jesus writing? Was he playing tic-tac-toe? What's awesome about that is Jesus had time to think. Whether he needed it or not, I think he sets a great example for us, as he had time to think. And with that time, he came up with the absolutely perfect response. The one phrase that could bring this to a peaceful end perfectly. Because he used his head. He took the time and he thought. In the story of the deer and the lion that I told you about earlier, the deer comes home and he believes that the lion is inside his cave. And so he uses his head and he calls into the cave and he says, "Cave, I'm home. Is anyone in there, or is it safe to come in?" And the lion's inside going, "This deer is nuts. Thinks his cave's going to talk to him." So he's like, "What do I do?" And the deer calls out again, "Cave, I'm home. If you don't answer me, then I'll know it's not safe to come in." And so the lion goes, "Uh-oh, the cave must really talk to him, and the cave knows I'm in here. Uh-oh." So he calls out, "It's just fine, Mr. Deer. Come on in." At which point the deer realizes there's a lion in the cave and runs away and saves his life, because as we all know, caves can't talk. Neither can lions or deer, but hey, it's a kid's story, right? What I love about that story, though, is the wisdom that the deer uses. He's facing a threatening foe, a foe that he could never defeat in a physical confrontation. He'd never outrun him. He'd never best him. But he used his head. He thought. He used wisdom. And he was able to do the right thing and produce a positive result. The same thing can happen for us. When we are faced with a challenge, we need to take our time and ask God for the wisdom to answer in a productive way. And God is willing and able to give us the right words in every situation. We just need to resist the urge to blurt out whatever comes to our mind first. Amen? Amen. The third thing I see that Jesus did is that he turned their attention to their own behavior. Can I say, how brilliant is Jesus? Like, seriously, he's smart. Like, really, like, create the whole universe smart, know everything smart. But I'm incredibly impressed. In one sentence, he got these men to look at themselves, to consider their own thoughts, actions, and beliefs, and he did it all without ever pointing a finger. Without ever pointing a finger. Let me ask you this. Why do most people challenge your religion? What's their motivation? What are they trying to accomplish? I think it's because they don't want to change their behavior. They see us, they see what we believe, and if what we believe is true, then they have to make a change, and they don't want to make that change. So if they can discredit you, they keep on doing whatever it is that they want to do that doesn't coincide with the belief that you hold. In this story, Jesus was being challenged because his teaching was threatening the religious leaders' hold on the people. He was giving them freedom. And these guys didn't like it. They were like, "This isn't good." He's threatening the way that we do life, the same way that when we share what we believe, we threaten the way that other people do life. And so they bring this challenge. We need to understand that we can be challenged by anyone who feels that their beliefs are threatened by our beliefs. That means your challenge might come from an atheist or a Muslim or a Buddhist or the person sitting next to you right now. The threat can come from anywhere. The Jews wanted to keep their system in place. They wanted to protect this idea. And Jesus understood that this was what was going on, right? They have a system they're trying to protect. And so he used his brain, and he comes up with this statement to get them to look at themselves. And what did he get them to understand? What was the system they wanted to protect? Sin equals death. That was the system that they wanted to protect. Sin equals death. So what did Jesus get him to do? Hey, anybody who hasn't sinned, go ahead. What starts happening in your mind there? You know, we always hear the story and we think, "Oh, I'm a sinner. I can't kill her." I think it's deeper than that. I think it's oh, hey, our system calls for sin to end in death. If we protect this system, I'm on the other end of these stones at some point. Jesus was so brilliant at getting them to keep their attention and their focus on themselves instead of on this woman. That's where they were focused when they walked in the door. They were focused on Jesus. They were focused on this woman. All of their rage and anger and venom, and we're going to get this Jesus, and he's trying to ruin things. And before they know it, and this happens, right? We get so focused, they're thinking, oh, wait a minute. Our system doesn't end good for us. Maybe we don't want to kill this girl. Let's just hold on to the other stuff. Let me ask you this. What do you think would have happened if Jesus, when they came in, had said, you're all just a bunch of sinners. Who are you to throw a rock at them? Do you think that would have ended well? Look at Proverbs chapter 9. This is awesome. Proverbs 9, 7 through 9. It says this, whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. What is that telling us? It gives us an incredibly important distinction. The men that came to Jesus, were they there hoping to figure out how can they learn from Jesus? Were they looking for instruction? What were they looking for? Blood. Too often we get these people who come at us with these challenges, and we think that reason is going to win the day. That we can point out the error of their ways and correct them and say, well, here's the problem, is you're thinking this, and this is what's true. And we think it's going to work. But what does this scripture tell us? It says that when you correct or rebuke a mocker, it just invites insult and hatred. You're thinking you've just lovingly explained to this guy who thinks that 2 + 2 is 8, that it's actually 4, and he wants to kill you for it. And you're like, but I'm right and you're wrong. There's a massive problem with the I'm right and you're wrong thing. You know what it's called? It's called pride. And we all struggle with it. It's why we're not very quick to say we're wrong or we're sorry. Jesus understood this. Instead of looking at them, matching their vibrato, coming at them and saying, hey, yeah, instead of throwing insults at them or correcting them, he simply says, yeah, absolutely, your system is great. Let's stick with that system. Whoever has not sinned, get started. I didn't think he was going to say that. They had two ideas. Either he's going to say, you can't kill her, and we got him, or he's going to say, kill her, and we got him. We got him, guys. This is perfect. And then he throws plan C, and they're like, what do we do with this? We have to be plan C people. We have to be people who use our heads and give a response that turns the attention back to them. So how do we do that? Can I be honest with you? I have no idea. I don't know. What I mean by that is I can't give you all the different, dictionary of person A says this and you respond with this. That's not what I know. I don't know that. But here's what I do know. When you're faced with a challenge, if you will refuse to match the intensity of your attacker, if you will stop and use your head and pray and ask the Holy Spirit, God, how can I give the right response? How can I give the response that Jesus would give in this moment? He'll give it to you. He'll give you the words that you need in that moment to allow for a better, peaceful end to come to this conflict, to see something productive come out of it. Because here's the thing. When your religion gets challenged, what is your typical thought? How dare they attack me? I'm going to win. Right? What if Jesus had made that his priority that day? You see, the thing we forget in this story is the secondary character. We've made her primary, she's secondary, but we need to bring her back to the forefront because here's the situation. This wasn't just about an argument. It wasn't just about who was right and who was wrong. A young woman An adulterous woman's life hung in the balance. Jesus handled the situation in such a way that the grace of God prevailed. And the opportunity for God's grace to make it through all of the bluster of the religious leaders made its way to that woman because Jesus refused to fight. He looked at her and said, I can't do it that way. She'll be collateral damage. Let me ask you, church, how many of your fights for a noble cause have led to incredible collateral damage? Because Jesus used wisdom, he had an opportunity as the crowd dispersed, as the mob left, to look at this woman who, again, disheveled, hair's matted and dirty. She's on the ground, half dressed. She's been pulled from this sin, and here she is on the ground, and he's able to look at her and say, Did no one accuse you? Did no one condemn you? No one. Then neither do I. Go. Sometimes we get so caught up in winning that we forget what our mission is. Can I tell you, Jesus doesn't need you to defend him? He's a big boy. He can take care of himself. Jesus does not need you to justify the way you live and the way you walk. Jesus needs us to emulate him so that the grace of God can make its way into the lives of people who believe that their sin is too big, that the threat is too real, that the threat is on top of them and there's no way out. Jesus needs us to be people of wisdom and peace who refuse to engage, refuse to escalate, and lives get saved because of it. As we close this morning, we're going to celebrate communion together. Communion is the ultimate act of remembering that Jesus refused to fight. When everything should have been, wait a minute, I'm the Son of God, you can't put me on a cross. Wait a minute, I spoke you into existence and everyone before and after you. You can't take my life from me. When everything shouted, jump off the cross and win the argument. If you're really the Son of God, come down off of there. I've told you before at this church, I would have been like, boom, here I am, because I want to win. Jesus laid his life down so that adulterous women and men and prideful men and women and lying, lustful, hateful men and women could receive grace. And this morning, I'm going to invite Pat to come up, and we're going to receive communion together.